So your manager has come to you to say that upper management have decided to revamp the company website. The new website, you've been told, has been created using WordPress, and the company would like for this to be hosted on a Linux VM in their existing infrastructure. With these requirements in mind, you're now thinking to yourself, how do I install and configure WordPress? Well, to begin following along with the tutorial, you will need a freshly installed copy of Linux, and for this I'm going to be using Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.3, but the process will be identical for anyone following along with either CentOS or Scientific Linux. If you're using another distribution such as Ubuntu or Debian, you'll probably still find this tutorial beneficial to get an idea of what has to be done, but there are differences between these distributions that would probably warrant going out and finding a tutorial specifically for your distribution. So to begin, we're going to install a few packages that are required in order to run WordPress, and I'm going to start that by using yum. So the packages that I have here, just to give a brief explanation, HTTPD is of course Apache, which will be the web server used to serve up files. ModPHP is the PHP processor, which is used to run the .php files that WordPress is comprised of. MySQL Server is the MySQL database package, which is used to store the content in the WordPress website. And PHP MySQL is the PHP libraries that allows it to talk to MySQL. So the first thing I like to do after installing any new services is just to ensure that they're configured to start at boot with the system. You can do this running check config on HTTPD on, and same goes with MySQLD, so we're just going to turn those on there. So with the required software installed, we can now proceed with configuring Apache. The first thing we need to do is create a configuration file for the website in the Apache conf.d directory. So we'll begin by navigating to etc httpd conf.d and then editing a new file called wordpress.conf. So into this file I'm just going to copy and paste some configuration that I've put up on the Castix website. And just to give you a quick overview here, this is defining a new virtual host called wordpress.castix.local. So when a user sends a request to browse to that particular domain name, it's going to serve up files under the document root here in var www.html WordPress. And I've also just included the error log to send errors to and the log to send access requests to. So obviously in there you'll want to substitute wordpress.castix.local, each of those, with the fully qualified domain name of your own server. But the rest is all that's required in order to set up a new virtual host for the website. On Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and certainly other distributions, only port 22 is allowed through the firewall by default. So before the clients can connect to our server, we need to also add a rule to IP tables to allow them to connect. The command iptables -i input, I'm going to say use the state module for IP tables and say if the state is new, the protocol is TCP, and the destination port, of course, is port 80. Then allow that through the firewall. I'm just doing an IP tables -nvl will show that that's been added up in here, right at the top. Now you might want to put that elsewhere. If you prefer to have allow connections that are related or established above that rule, it's probably a better idea, but for this example that's going to be fine. Don't forget to run service iptables save, otherwise the new rule that you've added will get lost during the reboot. And finally, I'm going to start Apache using service httpd start. Now note that you'll receive a warning when starting Apache to say that the document root for WordPress doesn't exist, That's because we haven't created it yet, and we'll be downloading WordPress and installing it to this directory in the next section, which will resolve this warning. So that's Apache configured. At this point, that's all that's required for when we download and install WordPress. The next step is to create a new database using MySQL and a MySQL user account for that, which WordPress can use to store its data. So to do this, we're going to start the MySQL service and then configure a root password. Now that's different from the local system root password. That's the root MySQL user. So important not to get those two confused, and you should probably be using a different password for both. So starting the service with service MySQL d start. And you'll see in the list of output that it gives here, it does actually mention that you should set that root password. So exactly what it specifies up here about setting that password, I'm just going to copy and paste that, and then set my own password in here. And of course you'd want to use something more secure than my-password, but that's what I'll use in this example. Now we've created now that we've set the root password, we'll create a new database called WordPress and assign a new user, also called WordPress, full access to that database. And to do that, I'm going to log into the database using that password that I just specified there. And I'm going to create the database by typing create database WordPress. And that's all that's required for that. The next step is to set up access for the WordPress user to use this database. So the command for that is grant all on WordPress.star. That's the name of the database on the left side there, and by putting star there I'm saying any table. I'm going to say for the user WordPress at localhost, because I'm not expecting connections from anywhere else. My database and web server are both hosted on the same box. Identified by my password. Now again, you probably want to use a different password for this particular user, certainly different to the root one that you assigned, and something complex. And you notice that you also have to finish each of those lines with a semicolon. And that's the database configured. So we've got the web server, we have the database configured, and both are now just basically waiting for us to install WordPress. So the final step in installing WordPress is to download the latest release of the software, and this can be done by changing to the directory where we're going to host that software. So var www.html. And I'm just going to install a utility called wget. Now this doesn't get installed by default if you've just installed Red Hat Enterprise Linux with minimal packages. And all this program does is just, you can specify URL and it'll download that file. So WordPress.org's made this really easy by always having the latest code bundled as a package called latest.tar.gz. Just make sure I've got connectivity. So I've just had to add a default route on my machine there because I hadn't set up networking correctly. But here we go. We'll download latest.tar.gz from WordPress.org, and that's going to be the, as the name implies, the latest version of WordPress. So now that that's downloaded, I can extract that file using tar-xzvf. The X is extract, Z is because it's a gzip file. V just stands for verbose, so I'll see all the files as it's extracting them, and F specifies the file. Changing into that WordPress directory now, we lastly need to edit a file called wp-config. I'm actually going to create that file first by just copying the sample config file across to wp config, and now edit wp config.php. So the settings that we need to modify in here, right at the top are three things. We need to modify the DB name, the DB user, and DB password to specify the settings that we used when we created our password just before. So the DB name I gave that new database was WordPress. The username was also WordPress, and the password, which is very insecure and you wouldn't want to use it for production, is my password. Okay, so that's Apache installed, WordPress also downloaded and configured, and the database set up. So at this point we should be able to point our browser at wordpress.castix.local, which is resolves to the IP address I've given this test virtual machine. And I have the WordPress setup page. So the first time you hit the WordPress website after installing it, it'll get you to run through this. Just a note, I've actually added a static entry for this to my Etsy host file, seeing as I'm not using DNS on my network, and that's something that you can do just to get this working if you don't have a DNS server set up. So on the WordPress page, all we have to do now is set a title for our site. I'm going to call it Castix WordPress tutorial. Not that that's what my boss would have asked for, but as an example. I'm going to leave the username as admin, and I'm just going to set a password in here of my-password. It's a little misleading that it thinks it's strong, but nonetheless. And then, of course, your email address. Now, that will be if there's an error message presented on the website, something along those lines that it needs to tell users, hey, email this guy, he'll fix it up for you. So I'll put my email as admin@castix.local. Just on a note, this particular option here, I presume, if you uncheck it, will put a no robots file into the directory. If you're unfamiliar with that, when Google indexes pages, it searches for this no robots file, and if it finds it, it won't add it to Google. But it's one of those things where the search engines has to conform to that. But I'm sure my company wants this website to be indexed by Google, so I'll just leave that as is. Success, according to the installer. So we can now log on to the website, and I'll do that using the password I just set there. And we're in, ready to start configuring our new corporate website. So thank you very much for watching, and hopefully this has shown you how to set up WordPress using Apache and MySQL.